I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. We are back for talking about the vice presidency. Today is gorgeous outside, Sunday, August 2nd, and it is a beautiful day. And I'm here to talk about the vice presidency just a little bit more because there's some great stories about our vice presidents. And hey, that's what we're trying to do, right? Let's learn about our vice presidents. So, yes, everything's great. The garden's going great. Maybe I did save the pumpkins. We'll find out. That's a continuing story. I'll post pictures on Twitter because I have nothing else to do. So thank you for joining me again. We're going to dive deeper into the fascinating world of the vice presidency. But I realized in yesterday's pod, I may not have been clear because there is a difference in the early days between the Electoral College and voting. Actual voting. So the electors, which just happened this weekend, the electors in the Democratic side finally turned in their votes. The electors, not the public, that's us. We voted in the primary to send electors to the Electoral College, which isn't a real thing. It's a virtual college, not a real thing. And they cast their vote for the candidate. So just this weekend, Kamala Harris locked up the the Democratic nomination. She was the presumed nominee. Now she is the nominee from the Democratic Party. And then the convention is where we celebrate and, rally. And it's a time to come together and get excited. So we'll be doing that with everybody as we get closer to that date, which is in 2 weeks, basically 2 weeks. So here we are. But do we really vote for the vice president? Well, in the old days, we used the Electoral College. And so that's how we had the story of the two, the Jefferson and Adams, who were on different tickets. Adams, the Federalist, Jefferson, the Democrat Republican. And they were both in office at the same time, with Adams as president and Jefferson as vice president. But back then, the electors voted for the leader. And that's how they came up with that whoever gets the most votes wins thing, because it was the electors. In this case, as a member of the public, we vote in a presidential election. We don't vote separately for the VP. We vote for the package deal, which is the president and the running mate as one ticket. So you don't, it usually says Biden Harris, Trump Pence, Trump Vance. It should say both names, I believe, on the ballot. I have a California ballot, so I don't even know how it looks. It is mind blowing to me just how different our ballots look in different states because of how states choose to do it. And I'm just blessed that I'm in a state where voting is a high value priority. And so our voting systems are very, very good. Anyway, you go on there, you vote for your president, and you get for free the vice president, who may not be the star of the campaign, but still they're really important. And who your candidate chooses really reflects their judgment. And that's probably that unfortunately is what happened to John McCain. Choosing Sarah Palin reflected really bad judgment. Sometimes I wonder, what did they do to this man? He survived POW camps. How did somebody convince him Sarah Palin was the way to go? Because she just doesn't have it. She doesn't have it. So anyway, it is typically a reflection of the main candidate's judgment. So that's a way to think of the vice presidency as well. But let's go look at some of these great stories, because some of these vice presidents really had an impact on our country. And so this is not a feckless, useless position. And I think when we just saw the negotiations and the prisoner release that happened across, I think it's 8 countries, the release that happened this week with Paul Whelan and the Wall Street Journal reporter and the woman. I'm sorry, need to know the woman. Been trying to keep up with all this, but that was a big deal. But it was really complicated. It was a lot of negotiation, a lot of a word that we don't hear very often, statesmanship, which is when you walk into a room and know other people have agendas and you're able to manage yourself in a way that supports their agenda and your agenda at the same time. That's statesmanship. That is a really good skill. You still don't want to get what you want to get for yourself, but you got to know how to negotiate, compromise, and find middle ground with people so that we can come out with the best outcomes for everybody. So that's statesmanship. Anywho, the point was, some of these vice presidents really made a big difference. So let's start with a vice president, many of us, actually, yeah, all the vice presidents I'm looking at are ones we should all generally remember, unless you're Gen Z or young millennial, late millennial. You might not remember some of these because you would be too young. So if you go back and look at Lyndon Johnson, and he was working under John F. Kennedy. So it was already Camelot. And if you don't know about Camelot, go look at it. Camelot was kind of a little mini golden era of the early 60s, when a lot of things were, we had stopped the Korean War. We were kicking the tires of Vietnam, but we weren't really there yet. So there was this beautiful time, and Johnson was the beautiful time in terms of like things could get done, like the space program. We all know about the space program. That was one of America's most exciting times, right? Because we just all felt we had hope, and we were all working together towards something. Even if we didn't actually do it, we could support it and felt like we belonged to something. So Johnson was vice president under Kennedy, and one of the biggest tasks he had to deal with was steering the United States through the space race. So if you remember, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and we were playing catch up. And Kennedy knew this was a big deal. It was important for national pride and for national security. And he put Johnson in charge of NASA's development. Now, I don't want to talk about what's happened to NASA today, but it ain't the same, guys. NASA was fire. And we all have stuff in our house thanks to this space program, including stupid stuff like aluminum foil. And I forgot the other stupid thing. But I mean, I know nonstick pans. I believe nonstick pans are a product of the space program. There's a ton, and I didn't Google that, and I should have. And Pop-Tarts, come on, Pop-Tart. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if Pop-Tarts were part of it, but I feel like Pop-Tarts came from the 60s, and they're very still important to me today. They will substitute for cake if you just need something sweet at the end of the day. I'm just saying. Get some tea and Pop-Tarts. Okay, so Kennedy's there. It's national pride, and Johnson's put in charge of NASA's development, and Johnson got it done. He pushed Congress to fund the space program, and it paid off. We had the moon landing in 1969, and it was all that hard work that he put in to the space program. And again, back to being a statesman, negotiating with both sides of the House and the Senate to get it through Congress. That's amazing. But Johnson was also a vice president who was very, very involved in civil rights. Even before he became president, he was using his connections in Congress to lay groundwork for the Civil Rights Act. That was in 1964. So Kennedy is 1962. I think in 1964, when he becomes president, he was ready to go for the Civil Rights Act, and he was the former Senate Majority Leader, so he knew how to maneuver through the political maze to get things done. And this is why I keep mentioning that the VP does need a skill set, and statesmanship is a very important skill set. So this VP, Lyndon Johnson, was able to wield a lot of influence before he even got the job of president. Civil rights, space program, he already had some massive street cred. Then we can move to Al Gore. So poor Al Gore, everybody loves to tease him. But the thing is, this man was a very good man, and he was vice president under Bill Clinton. And he was way ahead of his time when it came to environmental issues. That was his pet project. So before climate change was really even a buzzword, Gore was all over it, and he played a key role in the Kyoto Protocol. So the Kyoto Protocol's brought up a lot among the climate folks, and that was the first big international coalition to combat climate change. And they were looking for ways to make sure the garbage we were pumping out into the air and into our oceans, we had to stop that. We needed to protect our natural resources. I mean, that's all we have. So the U.S. didn't end up ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, but Gore's efforts got the ball rolling, and then he went on to stay involved after he was a vice president to work in the climate change arena, where he got the Nobel Peace Prize and made the movie An Inconvenient Truth, which, do with it what you will, it brought the issue to the front and center. And that's really important. But Gore wasn't a one-trick pony. He also was a tech nerd. I wonder if he's an Aquarian. He has these kind of very meta interests, which is, the environment, and then he cares about technology, but particularly tech and education. And I mentioned this yesterday, but one of his standout initiatives was Net Day. And my friend Lisa Smith worked on Net Day. And I just sit here with my mouth dropping when she tells me the stories. And she shows me the pictures of she and her future husband in their shorts, wiring, climbing up in ceilings and pulling wires. And there's Clinton and Gore in the room with ladders and people laughing. It's just great. Net Day was a grassroots movement that started in 1995, and it came, and Sun was huge behind this, and that's where Lisa and Bruce worked. It was at Sun. It was a grassroots movement that started in 1995 to wire the schools, and he supported this initiative because he believed the schools needed the internet to level the educational playing field. So remember what I talked about? His big thing was that democratizing the internet. And it has been, this is 1995, it has been nearly 30 years. Is that true? 30 years? And we to date, even in the stuff I write now for my cybersecurity gig with my evangelist, we talk about the democratization of technology. It is still the holy grail, to be perfectly honest. It's just not available to everyone everywhere. There's a little video going around where a little girl's trying to do her homework at Apple, and this guy comes in, pulls the iPad away from her, and all he's doing is getting her a stool so she can sit at the table and do her homework at the Apple store. I mean, we just haven't democratized tech yet. But anyway, Gore brought this up. He pushed Net Day. It had a big role in getting a lot of schools wired. I'm sure I could get Lisa to talk to everybody about it, because it was just amazing stories. And that enthusiasm for the tech ended up playing a role in promoting the development of the internet, which is why Gore always gets teased about inventing the internet. He didn't create it. He knows he didn't, but he was really critical in passing legislation that led to its commercialization so we could get it out to everybody. And we all now, the internet's like, we all just yell at it now because it's just a pain in the butt. It just means we're always on. But it's really amazing, isn't it? It's amazing I could do this podcast in my stinking little office with an iPhone and a headset, and we all do that thanks to tech. It's just amazing to me. So one of the things still gets me excited. The other VP we can look at is Dick Cheney, who was vice president for George W. Bush. And he was there when 9/11 happened. Cheney played a huge role in shaping the U.S. response to 9/11, including the decisions to invade Afghanistan and Iraq. This is a vice president. This is a big deal. These were massive controversial moves that had long-lasting effects on our U.S. foreign policy, and his influence behind the scenes was undeniable, whether or not you agree with his actions. The reality is he left a huge mark on history. We all will sit down and discuss that in history class and evaluate if it was good or bad, but I'm telling you, a vice president can have a huge influence on what we do in this country. So maybe if we think back and realize like how these vice presidents ended changing our country, if we look at these big missions, Johnson's push for space didn't just get us to the moon. It positioned us, the U.S., as a leader in space, and NASA as a powerhouse. So their whole job is exploring new frontiers. And I do get pretty excited when I see pictures from Mars, because it is at the same time, it is both incomprehensible that we are seeing pictures of Mars, and fascinating at how sometimes mundane it looks. Like it's just a dirty old planet. But the fact that we can hold both those thoughts at the same time, like how can we be seeing this and wow, that's super ordinary looking, is mind-blowing. Just mind-blowing. He also did all this work on civil rights and the Voting Rights Act, and that is essential to transform our society and bring us closer to the ideals of equality upon which this nation was founded. Well, the ideals of equality. Let's just focus with the concept of ideals of equality. We're not there on equality. And then the thing that's interesting about our vice presidents is Gore's mission didn't stop when he left office. He continued on his environmental crusade, and he's made a big impact on how we think about the climate. Dick Cheney, on the other hand, has a legacy that's more complicated. His decisions did influence the world after 9/11, but they really have changed executive power. So Cheney ended up to do some of these things that they did during that Bush administration. Cheney expanded executive power and the use of controversial interrogation techniques. It's the first time the VP has had such an important role in war-related, how do I say this? In some of the vagaries and ugliness of war. Let's just be truthful about it. And it's not my cup of tea. And I probably have a lot of opinions about it, but I actually kind of avoid this area in my life because it upsets me to know what happened at Guantanamo. I just don't like it. Okay, so with that, just taking a look at the role of vice president and what a big impact it can have, did you know? I have some did you knows, but they're kind of funny. Theodore Roosevelt was McKinley's vice president before he was president himself. So Theodore Roosevelt was a VP. He was known for his larger than life personality, but as VP, he was kind of ignored until McKinley was assassinated. And then Roosevelt just walked right into the presidency and shook things up with his square deal. And that was Roosevelt's domestic policy. And this is interesting because I think sometimes as vice presidents, these folks are in a unique position to see where America sucks. Like, just what are we doing wrong and what needs fixing? They're in it. They hear about it every day. They get the briefings. They know where we have security, safety, and where we have security that's not secure. They know everything that's going on. And so in this case, Roosevelt walked right in with the square deal. And this domestic policy emphasized fairness for all Americans by targeting 3 key areas. This is really interesting because this is, what are we, back in the 40s? No, Theodore Roosevelt, we're back further. What he did is he emphasized fairness on consumer protection, guys, control of corporations. Yow, we're talking about it again, aren't we? And we're talking about both consumer protection against this stupid inflation that's really been about price gouging, greedflation, I think it's called. The control of corporations, how much they can donate to campaigns, how much they can participate as ostensibly as citizens, thanks to Citizen United in our voting process. And then, of course, Roosevelt was really concerned about natural resources. And this is my man that saved my Yosemite. So, yeah, I get pretty excited about this. But he had this domestic policy, and it laid the foundation for today's regulatory practices. And it set, and listen to this, it set a precedent for government intervention in the economy to ensure social justice. So this is an American value that our government needs to ensure social justice. And it's doing it in a way that makes it so that there's fairness for all in consumer protection, corporation control, and conservation of natural resources. We have not, I think, done enough in these areas moving forward, but they're absolutely in play today. And then there's this guy, Charles Dawes, who served under Calvin Coolidge. Never heard of Charles Dawes, but it turns out this guy kicked some ass. He was a character, and he even played the piano during cabinet meetings, but he was also serious about international affairs. Again, this is our vice president. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work on something called the Dawes Plan of 1924. So this is just after World War I. The world's like crawling out of its shell. Remember, communication comes on those video clips at the movie theaters on Saturdays, and the news on the radio, and Air America or whatever it was. They don't get news all the time. So this Charles Dawes had this unique position in the Coolidge administration to pay attention to international affairs, and he came up with the Dawes Plan of 1924, which was designed to stabilize the World War economy in Germany by restructuring how it made reparations and secured international loans. But this is really important because it eased the financial burden on Germany, but also fostered economic recovery and stability in Europe, reducing the tensions that threatened to reignite conflict. Okay, well, let's just hold that because Germany's going to come roaring in for World War II, but it's not going to really be around economic recovery and stability. Germany's going to be, the rise of Germany is going to be a whole different issue altogether. But this is a really cool example of a VP who had a global impact in a way you might not even expect, like on the European economy. That's some pretty wicked VPing, if you ask me. And then finally, this is interesting because I do remember this. We had this guy, Nelson Rockefeller. Yep, one of the Rockefellers. I don't know if he can kick. I don't know if he can dance. But he did serve under Gerald Ford. And he was like, I remember thinking, because Gerald Ford was kind of just this goofy guy. Thank you, Chevy Chase. And Nelson Rockefeller, I always thought was just like this kind of Michael Bloomberg-y guy, like happy to be here, always happy to be here, realized he'd had a good life and he was generous in spirit. So the deal is that Rockefeller, as a wealthy businessman and former governor of New York, was known for his moderate views, which sometimes put him at odds with the conservative members of his party because he's a Republican. He's with Gerald Ford. Sorry, choked myself. Despite those being at odds, Rockefeller worked on urban policy and welfare reform, trying to find common ground and push for meaningful change. His work on urban policy focused on revitalizing cities through infrastructure improvements, affordable housing, support for education, and addressing the growing challenges of urban decay. I feel like I want to read that again because this is a Republican who is working to develop urban policy, to fight for affordable housing, public education, and fighting urban decay. His efforts in welfare reform sought to balance the expansion of social services with fiscal responsibility. Listen to that. Social services balanced with smart spending, and advocating for programs that provided a safety net, because God knows we've all needed a safety net, while encouraging self-sufficiency and reducing dependency on government aid. Okay, that's kind of a Republican trope there, no welfare. But at the same time, he didn't say no welfare. He said, wait a minute. Let's help these people help themselves. And he did this as a vice president, as a Republican vice president, which is pretty darn amazing. So there you go. There's a little primer on vice presidents. They don't just get to sit on the sidelines. Some of them have stepped up and made history, advancing the space race, climate change, education, national security. It's incredible. And it's the VP office is really just more than the second highest office in the land. It can be a powerful platform for change. So thank you for hanging out with me today on a Sunday. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Isn't football coming back soon? Am I going to get to see Trav and never mind. Okay, Killer Trav and Jason. I'm not even a Chiefs fan, and yet here I am. I guess I'm a Chiefs fan. It's almost time for football to come back. Enjoy your beautiful Sunday in August, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.